Hey guys, my name is Matthew, and today we're talking about the difference between the average US citizen and the average UK citizen. Here we go. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about, the difference between the average American and the average British person. What do they look like? What do they act like? What do they spend their free time doing? What do they do with their money? And I think we're going to pull out some interesting key insights, cultural differences between these two populace. But I've got a couple quick caveats. The first one is that average is a useful metric, but it's not a perfect metric. And to illustrate that just really quickly, I'll use this fact. Most people, the vast majority of people, have an above average amount of arms. Now that sounds a little silly to say, but if you look at simply the math, that's true. Almost everyone has 2 arms, but some people have 1 arm or 0 arms. And so the average number of arms that any given person will have is 1.99, let's say, which means anyone who has more than 1.99 arms, i.e. almost everybody, they have 2 arms. They have above average number of arms. And so an average can be a useful tool, but it can be misleading or deceptive as well. That being said, today we're going to be looking at a lot of different studies. When I pick studies, I just want to give you a little bit of criterion for them. First of all, almost all of them are between 2017 and 2019. I thought 2020 would be a bad year to pull data from because there's so much out there, and obviously coronavirus has affected us in so many different ways. Also, I didn't want to go back super far in time. I don't want to be comparing the UK from 2005 to the US from 2017 or something. I don't think that would be a fair comparison either. So I tried to pull data from recent years that compares our two countries, where they're at, and what does the average American look like now versus the average British person looks like now. One other quick caveat, I'm actually not going to link any of the studies below. They're all really easy to find, but some data is a little bit off from other data. I looked for collaborative sources, so I needed to find at least 2 or 3 sources that gave me a number that was within plus or minus 3% of the number that I found. And where possible, I tried to find data that used the same type of information from the US and the UK, i.e. I didn't look at a data source that pulled 2,000 British people and 100,000 American people. I tried to find them when they were at least close to each other, so that way I was comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, if that makes sense. Without further ado, here we go. First, we're going to be looking at the way that an average American looks versus an average British person looks. To start with, we'll look at height. Both countries report that the average height is around 5 foot 9 inches. They're almost the exact same, with some data suggesting that Brits might be a tiny bit taller than Americans, which I was actually surprised by. I thought that Americans might be a little taller, but they're almost the exact same. When it comes to weight, there is actually a difference, though the difference is not as big as I was expecting. The average male in the United States weighs in about 191 pounds, and the average male in the UK runs in at 184 pounds. That's less than 10 pounds on average, and I was expecting those numbers to be a lot bigger based on the stereotype of how obese Americans are. It turns out the Brits are catching up quickly, and that data has changed a lot in the last 20 years, with Brits gaining a lot of weight. For females, the numbers are even closer, with the average American female weighing in at 159 pounds and the average British citizen weighing in at 154. So again, really close numbers, surprisingly close given the United States' reputation for having all the obesity and heart disease issues and all that kind of stuff. Now, as far as the other ways that we look, the average British citizen is by far white, at 87% that report themselves as British white. The next closest ethnicity is Asian at 7%. For the United States, we are also largely white, with 76% reporting themselves as white or of European descent, and followed up closely with Black as our secondary ethnicity group with 13%. So your average American and your average British person in general, they're going to look probably the same. It's really easy to go from one place to the other and not necessarily stick out based on the way we look, although if you talk, that obviously changes things really quickly. So let's talk about who they are. What is a British person versus American? What are some stats about them? What does the life of an American versus a British person look like? We'll start with education because I think that was interesting. This is a stat that I wasn't really expecting. Americans on average are more educated than British people, and I wasn't expecting that at all. Americans are much more likely to have a degree, at 45% or so of American citizens between the age of 25 to 64 with a degree of some kind. It's only 35% or so for British people in the same age bracket. So on average, Americans are likely to be a little bit more educated. That was surprising to me given that there's so much debt surrounded with American education and that system, which is in a lot of ways broken. That's not what this video is about. But it was just a surprising fact to me that Americans are actually more likely to go and get their degree, even though it will cost them a lot more money. Marriage rates were an interesting one. I will admit I couldn't nail down I couldn't find enough collaborative sources to nail down an exact marriage rate, but I will say everything I looked at showed that marriage rates in both countries are decreasing. People are much less likely to get married than they were 10, 20, 30, and 50 years ago. Another interesting fact is, and again, this is about the same for both countries, but people are getting married later in life. On average right now in both countries, a woman is likely to get married in their mid-30s and a man is likely to get married in their late 30s. So very similar in our marriage practices. Our rates for having children are also close. In the United States, we are having about 1.93 children per person, and in the UK, it's 1.7. So very similar, just short of 2. People aren't quite having 2 kids, I guess. One last fact to throw in this category, which is a major negative for Americans, is your likelihood of being jailed. How likely it is that you're actually just in jail. And for every 100,000 citizens, about 700 of them are in jail in the United States. That's not a good rate. The UK rate isn't wonderful either. It's 173 for every 100,000, but that leaves you about 7 times more likely to be jailed in the US than in the UK. So that is not really great for either country, but it is particularly glaring for the US. Next, I'd like to look at our health practices. Not so much the healthcare systems, which we've done a video on if you want to check it out, but more so about the health in general of our countries. Let's start with life expectancy. In the UK, you're likely to live a little bit longer. It's about 81.1 is your age on average that you're expected to live, as opposed to 78.5 in the US. Now those numbers, you're likely to live about 3 years longer in the UK. The question is maybe why, and there are lots of things we could point to, whether it's NHS or the aforementioned obesity rates, but I've got some stats, some averages here that I thought were quite interesting. This was an interesting thing. Americans are apparently much more likely to get close to the amount of sleep that they're supposed to get. They, on average, get 7 hours and 36 minutes of sleep in a night, as opposed to Brits, which get about 6 hours and 19 minutes of sleep a night. In those studies, I did think it was interesting. Americans are more likely to get extra sleep on the weekends and less during the work week, where British citizens are a little bit more likely to get a more sustained amount of sleep throughout the week, but in average, it's actually less sleep. The US and the UK also have similar suicide rates. Neither one of them is particularly good as well when compared to other countries. In the US, we're a little bit higher right now at about 13.2 per 100,000 citizens, and in the UK, it's more like 11 for 100,000 citizens. Those aren't great rates. What's interesting about this is those numbers have actually flip-flopped. The UK was doing much worse when you looked historically in the last 30 years. But they've done a great job of reducing their rates over the last, like I said, 30 years. The US has had a little bit of a roller coaster in their rates. This one really surprised me. I knew that the UK did more smoking than the US, but I thought that it was going to be a much higher number. These are percentages. Apparently in the UK, about 14.7% of all citizens smoked in the year 2018, and in the US, about 13% of all citizens smoked in 2019. Those numbers are really close. Those are a self-reported number, so there could even be, some issues, some smudging of numbers in those. What I thought was really interesting was this doesn't fit with my experience very well, because when I was in the UK, I felt like people were much more open about the fact that they smoked. They would do it out in the open, whereas in the US, I feel like people are a little bit less open about it. And so I assumed those numbers were going to be bigger. I think the problem is in the US, people maybe smoke and you don't even know about it, although I think maybe you smell it. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. Why are these numbers closer than I was expecting them to be? Do you have a thought about why? Another place where I was surprised by how close these numbers were was in the alcoholic drink consumption kind of area. The reported number of weekly drinks in the UK was 15 alcoholic units, which is quite a bit. I think anyway. I'm not a big drinker myself. In the US, those numbers were 11 alcoholic units a week. So those are pretty close numbers. But what really got me was this study that was done about how many times the average British citizen gets drunk in a year. And I was shocked to see that that number was 51 times in a year. That's to say that the average British citizen gets drunk literally almost once a week. Literally once a week you're getting drunk as an average British citizen. And I thought, wow, that number is going to be so much lower for US citizens, and it's not. It's 43 times a year, which is a little bit lower, but it's still a kind of a ludicrous number of times to get drunk in a year. And what really got me actually was the English-speaking world tops this list like crazy. It's America, the US, the UK, Australia, and Canada were at the top of this list, which included countries like Russia and Germany that are known for their drinking, and China that, all these countries that do a lot of drinking. The English-speaking world wins that competition. So maybe something to work on, guys. Another one that was surprising for me was exercise. Now, I'm not sure if this was about a definition of exercise, although this were studies that were done in both countries by the same group. I'm not sure if, anyway. Americans apparently report as doing 17 minutes of exercise a day on average, which is not enough. People recommend 30 minutes at least of strenuous exercise a day. In the UK, people only do 10 minutes of exercise a day. That is really interesting to me because I would have thought those numbers would be switched. But apparently in the US, we're a little better at doing exercise daily. Okay, I've got some data here about money. I'm just going to read the stats, so my eyes are definitely not going to be at the camera. Sorry for that. First one is about income. In the US, people make an average of $48,000 a year, or about 35,600 pounds. In the UK, people make about 29,600 pounds, or about $39,800. In the United States, you're more likely to make a little bit more money than you are in the UK. Your salary is going to be a bit higher. But what goes along with that is your daily spend. In the United States, not daily spend, this is actually weekly, about how much a household is going to spend is about $1,230 in the United States, or about 900 pounds. And in the UK, it's about 585 pounds a week, which is about $800. So you spend a lot more on average in the United States as well, whether that's because of income inflation or because of cost of living. Probably something that would need a little bit more, but those are the averages. And another shocking number for me was the amount of debt that American households are in is $131,000 on average, or 92,000 pounds. Is crazy. The UK is not doing a lot better, actually. 60,449 pounds on average, or about $81,000. Those numbers are staggering to me, guys. We got to work on our debt in both of these countries because those are crazy numbers. That's hard to live with that kind of debt, I feel like. So we got to work on that, guys. $131,000. Oof. That's a lot of debt. I guess that also seems like hospital bills and college debt and stuff. Wow, 131. How do you get that much debt? That's crazy. Lastly, let's talk about what Americans and British citizens do with their time. As far as television watching, that's a great pastime. Americans do about 33 hours of that a week. British citizens do about 22 and a half hours of that a week on average. In a year, the average American citizen reads 4 entire books. Good work, guys. And in the UK, you read about 10 books in a year. I found amount of time worked, it varies. The way that they do these studies, it was hard to find a directly comparable study between the US and the UK. It seems like the US, though, the closest I could come, it looks like Americans work about 37 hours a week on average, and British people work about 36 hours a week on average. That's for people who are actively full-time employed. So, that includes time for, time off and vacation and things like that, averaged out over the year. I was expecting those numbers to be different, much higher. And again, I can't quite figure out if that's attributed to the studies that I found, or if that's because British people actually work more than I think they do. It didn't quite fit with my experience of living in the UK, but let me know what you guys think about those numbers. 36 hours a week for Brits and 37 for Americans. It turns out that Americans spend about 5 hours a day on their phones. That's clicking around on social media and doing all the phone things. Brits spend a little bit less time, on average about 3 hours and 20 minutes. Again, those numbers are close enough that it's still, I think, alarming. Anyway, these are just some numbers, some averages. What does the average US citizen look like versus the average UK citizen? When I look at these numbers, I see problems in both countries, but we actually share a lot more problems than I maybe thought we did. I think there are a lot of stereotypes about Americans and stereotypes about Brits. For instance, Brits are terrible drinkers and Americans are all obese. But we're actually a lot closer, even when compared to other countries, than you might think. I think there's, that's part of the globalization issue, but it's also something just to say about we have common roots, and a lot of those issues overlap, certainly. What do you guys think about this? Were these numbers surprising? What facts stood out to you as particularly interesting? Let me know what cultural phenomena you can draw from those as well. Any other facts that you guys are wondering about? And let me know what research that you're going to do based on what you saw here today. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, see you next time.